Welcome into the final regular season edition of The Rundown, presented by Michigan ADAS. Brandon Ward, JT Scarpelli running duos today, and we got a big week ahead of us here. A lot of implications. Playoffs start next week. It's easy to jump to next week, but let's just say this up front. Football is going to be fun this week. There are so many good matchups on paper. We can't wait to break it down for you. But, I mean, this is the week to be a high school football fan. Like, this is what you live for going into the postseason is week 9.
Yeah, and one of the biggest games. That's why we're here.
That's why we're here,
The
right.
home of the Aggies in Beal City, the beautiful background and everything. Reed City coming here to take on the Aggies. It should be an interesting one for you.
It's going to be fun, but we'll get into a recap of week 8. We'll talk about your big win at home as well as our big win on the road. And we'll talk about the CSAA scores, and then we'll get into what's going to happen with our playoff projections. It's going to be really fun. We'll talk about if the favorites win. We'll talk about where it stands right now, what situations could move things around that you'll be on the lookout for, and even some teaser games that you might want to be a fan of and some opponents that I think our fan bases are not going to want to root for, and we're going to tell you why you have to root for them this week. So a lot on deck. But big thanks to Michigan ADAS. That makes this whole broadcast and episodes possible. They've been our series sponsor all season long, and they've done a great job, and they'll do a great job for you.
Yeah, Michigan ADAS calibrations in glass. They handle remotely or on site any kind of windshield chip or crack. They will replace it. And then what people don't always realize is that the cameras and sensors on your car, they will get out of sync whenever that happens, and they don't always get fixed. So that's what their specialization is that ADAS system. They will recalibrate it. They will get it working again so your car continues to drive safely, keep everybody in there safe with all of its features.
Absolutely.
Michigan ADAS.
Yeah, big thanks to them. You can find them off Northland Drive and 19 Mile Road and get your vehicle serviced. So, all right, let's get right into week 8, and we'll hand it over to you, partner. I mean, that's one of the biggest wins we've seen since COVID for this football team.
Yeah, big-time win. I think a lot of people had doubt that the Cardinals would take down the Coopersville Broncos. They were 0-2 all-time against them. Coach Seltzer was 0-2 against them. Those games, we gave up a lot of points, 7 points. They gave up 7 points, 1 touchdown in the second quarter, and nothing after that. The defense, Coach Fricky and Coach McCall, Dr. Drip, I'll give you your due as well. Their defensive unit was stellar, shutting down Bo, the quarterback Bo, as well as Lemieux, the running back, and some of these pretty big bodies that Coopersville had. You had no idea that there was a size mismatch to the way that the Cardinals played, especially up front. Those big guys were going up. Caden Schuberg, Max Bowman, Braylon Counselor, name a few, were going up against a Division I player in J.J. Herds. He just decommitted verbally from Western, and then he got an offer from Illinois. We didn't call his name one time.
Wow.
He was not as big of a... Maybe on film, when you go back, you'd be like, oh, okay, it was. He was not as big of a factor, especially as Stry, week 1 for Pawpaw, who's going to, I think, Kentucky.
Yeah, SEC.
Yeah, I mean, he was a game wrecker on both sides of the ball. Didn't see that as much with the big bodies out of Coopersville. Some of the comments I got after the game from both the coaching staff and the players, Big Rapids really hit him in the mouth early, and they didn't really know how to respond to it. So, I don't know, maybe some of that Grand Rapids area football is getting a little soft, and us Northerners are kind of teaching them how it's played. So, Big Rapids only 7 points allowed. Final score of that game, 24-7. It moves them to 7-1. It really changes. We'll get into this later. It changes what that playoff outlook is. The preview of that is the Cardinals went from getting in, hoping to get a good matchup, that they don't have to go somewhere too tough, to they're hosting. There's 99% chance that they're going to host a game because of that win against Coopersville for Big Rapids. It's not the first game they've ever hosted. They hosted a game back in 2003. During that run, they actually played Whitehall at Top Taggart and beat them. Yep. And then they hosted Newaygo back in 2020. Will Strickler blew them up. And then, but this will be the first playoff game at Cardinal Stadium that will ever have been hosted by the Cardinals. So it's very exciting no matter who they play, and we'll get into that in a little bit.
Absolutely. And week 9, especially for you guys, looking from week 8, keep that performance up. You're not going to have any problems against the Panthers on the road.
No. To be perfectly frank, Alma looks bad. They do not look like the strongest team that you could play. I mean, they're really not helping anything in the playoff points. They're going to be a one-win team. The expectation, really the most exciting part of this game might be that we could see some of the younger guys coming in.
Right, exactly.
Like we saw Baby Brant warming up a couple weeks ago and actually ran into Cody Kyling, of all people, a little bit after that.
No kidding.
And Cody was listening, driving. Yeah, shout out Cody Kyling. Driving back from work, and he was like, man, we're really hoping that freshman would get in. That was like the most exciting part of the game, you know. So it could happen at Alma. But, yeah, it's not expected to be a competitive game, but it's high school football. You still got to show up and play. And you know that Coach Seltzer and the Cardinals are expecting to do that. Absolutely.
The JV guys, watch some of their games this year. They got some talented players, including their shot caller. So we hope to see that. Reed City, big win on the road. Tri-County's a team you can't take lightly this year. Obviously, they've been down. Injuries have plagued. Plague is the correct term with this team. They've lost almost all their skill guys. They were pulling up some guys that were JV receivers and that had going into the backfield. I mean, they are just really, the cupboard is bare when it comes to their skill players. So this was an uphill battle for that defense.
But they do have one of the best concession stands in the area.
That is very true.
Just ask Kostecki.
We did not get their fries this last week, and that's the biggest regret. But I think especially when it comes to the big play offense with this running attack, three-headed monster was on display. All three guys, Kopic, Kianis, as well as Owen Williams, all over 120 yards rushing. Distributed load. We had a couple guys as well. Preston Wayne getting into the end zone with a rushing touchdown, as well as we saw McKinney, 2 interceptions on the outside. He also got a receiving touchdown. And they're complementing this offense really, really nicely. And the defense is making plays too. We haven't seen as many turnovers last couple weeks. We got a couple this week against Tri-County, so big confidence booster there. And it's going to be needed to play against these guys. The Aggies are a good football team, right? This is a sports town, right? It is not a big town, but they take their sports seriously, right? And this is why, especially, we bring it back all the way to week 1, right? Full circle. We're talking about the schedules, our favorite games, right? And this one was hands down my favorite because this screams Friday Night Lights. Small towns in Texas shut down the town, downtown. Lights are out, signs on the windows saying we're at the football game, right? That's what this week is going to feel like. And this is the biggest game since 2020, at least, going back to the couple of the years that they've been playing at Ford Field very consistently. This is a team that's made it, I believe, 8 or 9 times to Ford Field since 2000. That's a pretty impressive mark for this town.
It's not just football either, right? It's Coach Ancliffe and the baseball program, back-to-back state champions. It's, the thing that I envy about Beal City in a way is what do all the athletes do in the fall? They play football. What do all the athletes do in the winter? They play basketball. What do they all do in the spring?
They play baseball. Of course.
So you got to envy that a little bit. But these kids, I mean, Beal City, for being a small D8 school, they keep churning kids out. I mean, last year they graduated CMU Chippewa now, and Caden Smith, he was, a lot of people don't know, in the American Legion World Series. He ended up being the player of the year in the American Legion nationwide.
Yes, of all the nations.
So, yeah, Caden Smith, I mean, tremendous athlete, and he's not the only one. So they're all over here. I mean, it's an impressive little school. It's why we wanted to drive out here. It might not look like much. And Reed City, fans might want to bring their own chairs.
Yes.
Because there's not a whole lot of space to sit. But
standing room only,
okay.
Not by choice, but by pretty much forced at that point.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest thing, Beal City is a team that loves to score points, and they are a very good offensive team. You look at the resume of the teams they played this year, obviously not to the caliber of Reed City's schedule, right? But it's hard to top that. It's the top schedule by far in D6. It's not even close. We've done the math. It's not even close. But Beal City, they got a couple weapons out there. This is a young team. The Aggies are a young team. They want to spread you out a little bit, make those big plays offensively, very similar to a team that's going to be traveling here. But for Reed City, if they can use that running attack, win in the box early, set up a lot of those big plays, get to play action pass, get to a lot of those outside runs, and you're able to turn them over a couple times, they're going to be in good shape. I mean, this is a good Beal City team, but Reed City shouldn't come into this like, man, this is a really big game. We got to, if they play their game, they can win this game, right? They are favored on paper, and it's with the resume, it's with all the development they've had this year, and they look as good as they did ever this entire season last week. So that's going to be really crucial. But there's also some other big games as well coming up this week when it comes to the CSAA and more. Obviously, there's a couple games in the CSAA that are to highlight, but it's in the Highland that we're going to talk about here in just a minute. But with the CSAA, obviously you guys are playing Alma, Reed City playing Beal City. Ludington is is going to Tri-County. Tri-County is in a situation where right now, I think we've done the math, they are in the postseason, and we'll obviously break this down a little bit more as we go in, that they are in, but this is a massive game for as far as seeding goes. Right now, they're going to be lined up against Frankenmuth. Those that know football know Frankenmuth is one of the top in the state, regardless of division. So they're going to want to win to see if they can get different seeding. And then also Newaygo at Fremont. And obviously we'll talk about Reed City's implications of hosting and how Newaygo has really thrown a wrench in a lot of this. But Newaygo's looking to stay on top on the road. Grant going to Kent City. Grant beating Chip Hills last week, really in dominant fashion. I don't think a lot of people saw that coming, the way that Chip Hills had kind of been playing over the last couple of weeks. And so we'll see what Kent City has in mind, because they're really going to be fighting for seeding as well. And then you also wrap it up as well. Chip Hills going to Lakeview. And then over in the white, you have Montcalm going to Hart. Montcalm should win that game.
Yeah.
But traveling is always going to be a hard part. Hart might have the best game of the year, and right now they need it if they're going to have a chance to make the postseason. So Montcalm should expect the best from the Pirates.
Yeah, and you don't really know, too, is Coach Kripe going to save a couple guys or something like that for the Hornets? You're already in. The regular season's essentially over. But the expectation is that Lingman and the Hornets will roll the Pirates in this game. But, let's just jump to that Highland matchup. The two games to look for, one of them is mainly, both these teams are in the playoffs.
Yes.
One of them is the number one team in D8.
Yep.
But the reason why you're going to want to check this game out, the McBain Ramblers, undefeated, number 5 in D7, taking on Fowler, 8-0, Fowler, number 1 in D8.
Wow.
At McBain. That's going to be a great game to watch just as a football fan. But then you also have, we did the math, and Everett's really on the bubble of making the playoffs here. If they beat Harrison, who is ranked in D7, number 8 in D7, they're 7-1. If the Wildcats can knock off Harrison, they're definitely in. One of our models has them knocking off Harrison and therefore getting into the playoffs. But if they don't, it's going to make it, that's going to make it pretty tough. They're going to be on the bubble. So right now, with a win, they would most likely they would host Oscoda.
Yeah, which is a very similar team. On record, on paper, the whole nine.
That's right. So without that win, though, they're probably still going to make it, but it's going to flip. You're going to have to get in the car and drive somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So those are going to be some notable ones as well. You got Beaverton going to Houghton Lake. Houghton Lake still on the bubble, looking to get in. They're 4-4 right now. The rest of the teams looking for momentum to end the regular season. When it comes to Stanwood going to Pine River, Kalkaska to Roscommon. Do not overlook Roscommon. I'm putting the over on 80 combined points in that game, because based on what we've seen, anybody that plays the Bucks needs to score 50 points to win.
Didn't Roscommon have like 96 combined points
in the last 2 weeks?
Yeah.
Yes, it's insanity. Right? And so if you want offense,
they just take the defense off the field. They only play offense.
Yeah, here, go ahead, and we'll just go right ahead.
We're just going to rest our guys for offense.
Yeah, exactly. So, but all right, let's get right into the postseason. We will go on the other side of the coin flip. Reed City first. This is right now what we are currently at. So at this moment, if the playoffs started today, no week 9. This is what we're sitting at right now. Reed City hosting, and this is very interesting to look at it this way, hosting Manistee. Newaygo would be in this district with Mason County. It would go to Newaygo. And right now, if that were the case, then now you're going to see Reed City, Newaygo potentially line up once again in Week 10. Both those teams won. You got Negaunee as well, going to be hosting Calumet up north, which I think both the UP teams are like, oh, thank goodness we don't have to travel to the Lower Peninsula for round 1.
Yeah.
Then you got Kingsley hosting Boyne City right now. That's Region 1. Now, we have the hypothetical scenario in this model of if the favorites win, right? Favorites on paper, playoff points, the whole 9. This is what's very interesting. Right now, Snooze has, this is the S2Y model, has Montague winning against Ravenna. Why is that important? You're like, why should we care? This is why you should care. If they win, Newaygo now, with the mapping, pulls down Newaygo into Region 2. So that leaves the door open for Reed City. And now you got Kingsley swapped in. Now, why is that important? Because then Reed City hosts 2 straight playoff games. If they win, they're going to host again because they have more points than Kingsley. Newaygo right now will finish I don't think there's a possible scenario, even if Newaygo wins, even if all the opposing teams, right, because we're hypothetically, yes, this sounds crazy, we're rooting for Pontiac Notre Dame in points perspective, right, because you benefit teams winning that you've played already this year, right? You're rooting for Kingsley. But Newaygo would actually be the 1 seed if they were to win and stay in the district with Reed City. They'd outlast them by, I think it's a half a playoff point. It's super close. And so that would be the hypothetical scenario. So we are theoretically rooting for Montague this week, Pontiac, Notre Dame, all those teams, so we can try to flip and get the hosting duties. But matchup's going to be important. But it'd be Reed City and Manistee, and then Kingsley against County Central. Maybe a rematch in the district final game of what we saw in week 1. I think everybody wouldn't mind seeing that.
Yeah, and based on what Landon Jackson was telling us when he was on here too, right? He wants that.
They want him. They want him
felt
again.
Pretty good after playing Kingsley, the Stags, in week 1. Well, speaking of Pontiac Notre Dame, there's actually some implications with them for Big Rapids.
Right,
even,
exactly.
in the seeding for Big Rapids. So if the season had ended today, as you were saying, for Reed City, Big Rapids would host Ludington as the 1 seed. Ludington the 4. Forest Hills Eastern would then host Whitehall in that. Pretty good scenario if you're Big Rapids. You take on the Orioles, a team that you're somewhat familiar with. You saw them in 7-on-7s back in the summer, but clearly the down team of those 4, you let Whitehall, Forest Hills beat each other up, and then you play the winner of that. Hosting that game as well. So how did we get to that scenario? Well, a couple short weeks ago, week 7, Escanaba was supposed to be in this, which would have blown up this entire region and shifted everything. But they lost in a shocker to Gaylord in week 7. That eliminated the Eskimos from postseason play. That made Ludington the most northern Division IV team likely to make the postseason and ensured all but Big Rapids would go back to the Lakeshore yet again.
Yes.
The next thing that happened, Whitehall in a matchup with Ludington blasted the Orioles 47-10 in week 7.
Wasn't
week
close.
7 was pretty big, yeah. Kind of surprising. Ludington on paper looked like that would be a closer game. Whitehall took care of them. If the Orioles had come out on top of that, they would have been in contention to be a 1 or 2 seed in this region. However, that also could have flipped that region to include Unity Christian, who we don't want to see for as long as we can, as the number 1 ranked Division IV team right now. So those 2 things happen. That was pretty big. But back to my Pontiac Notre Dame reference, there are 2 games that Big Rapids has to pay attention to because it will really help secure that 1 seed. So there's a scenario in which Whitehall could become the 1 seed. That scenario is they obviously have to win. They have to beat the Portland Pokemon Friday night. Portland is undefeated. So, however, when I dug into their schedule, they really haven't played anyone that good. The best team that they played on paper is Olivet, who's number 8 in D6.
Not a bad team, but not the best team.
Yeah, so, for some context there, like Reed City is ranked number 6 in D6. But a couple D4 teams that were pretty low ranked, Ionia being one of the better ones. They're ranked 22nd in D4. Some context there, Fremont and Fruitport are ranked in the bottom part of D4 too. So just, give you a little context of how these teams all kind of match up. So Portland really isn't, maybe they're a little better on paper than they are in reality, and Whitehall obviously a little better in reality than they looked on paper about halfway through the year. That Ludington game seemed to really be the turning point for them. So we go back to, once again, I keep teasing it, the Pontiac Notre Dame.
Right.
The other thing that has to happen, so Whitehall has to win that game, but Unity has to win against Pontiac Notre Dame at Pontiac Notre Dame. They're given a 51% chance by Goose to do that. But that will give Whitehall the points to be the 1 seed in the region. The reason for that is in week 1, one of Whitehall's losses to Unity Christian. So how the playoff points work, if Unity wins, that helps them. So we are actually, Big Rapids fans are rooting for Pontiac Notre Dame to beat Unity. And then, of course, we're rooting for the Pokemon to take down Whitehall. So those are 2 other games to look for Friday night.
So you're telling me that 2 rivals from a Bittertown rivalry are both rooting for Pontiac Notre Dame this week?
Yeah.
Who would have thought we would have gotten this far going at the part of the season?
And that's also, that's a heck of a game too.
Oh my gosh.
I think Notre Dame just got edged down to like number 2 right, in their division.
In some rankings, yes. Some are still one. Yeah, they're up there for a reason. Them, West Catholic, right? They're the perennials of D5.
But again, like what would be interesting to see is if they beat Unity Christian and it's somewhat of a close game. I mean, Reed City really hung with Pontiac Notre Dame for a while. So it just kind of gives you, I think it's what's really interesting, right, is you assume all these Detroit, these big city schools are, they're big time.
Yeah.
And then we're little country folk or something, right? But it's like what that kind of gives you is it gives you the perspective of like, hey, Reed City can compete.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Big Rapids is, in a lot of rankings you found, is what, 10th?
Are hanging around in the Ultra ranking. Sure, I'll throw them up on the screen right now. They're at right around 7 when it comes to mashing every poll that's been made in the last, 5 days when it comes to pre-week 9. They'd be right around 7 in D4. Reed City right around 4 in D6. So both of these football teams are good.
Yeah,
and it's a good thing to talk about.
They're good, and they're not just good for the area. They're good teams, right? And that's, I think, a lot of these rankings are giving that. Now, rankings are rankings, right? So who knows what that means? You gotta put the cleats on the turf, and you got to do something about it. But I think Big Rapids showed something with that against Coopersville, who's not a bad team. Giving up 7 points to a team averaging almost 40 a game down south in a more competitive conference. It's pretty good. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, Big Rapids could be for real. And this is when their time to show, hey, last year was not just a fluke. Let's keep rolling. And with a positive matchup, a host matchup against Ludington, and then playing the winner of Forest Hills and Whitehall, ideal. So we need to root for Pontiac Notre Dame to win, and we need to root for the Portland Pokemon to win. However, if one of those things happen, then Whitehall most likely is not the 1 seed.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be both. This isn't an MLB crazy wild card, how do we get to the postseason thing?
Hypothetical. Yeah,
this guy's got to win, and then the weather's got to be good there, and then, the sun has to be in this place in the sky. This is just if one of those two things happens. So the snooze to you, he has Whitehall as the 1 seed, assuming that those things happen. We'll see. A lot of stars have to align. But, I think that either way, Big Rapids, so if Whitehall is the 1 seed, Big Rapids is the 2.
Yes.
So they're still hosting. But they would then host Forest Hills Eastern instead of Ludington.
Yeah, so we got a lot of really big games this week, and to highlight the rest of the CSA as well. Right now, if the favorites were to win, Newaygo would host Montague in round 1. This is, of course, assuming Montague wins. If Montague loses, Newaygo likely goes north in with Reed City, and now you're going to see Central Montcalm and those teams go down and start to filter into the Lansings, right? You're going to see Olivet. You're going to see potentially Parchment, Constantine. That would be a really weird situation, but it is possible. There is also a possibility that Reed City even could go north. There is a hypothetical possibility, but 10 or 11 things have to happen, and it's really not likely. But when you're looking at that matchup, and then Central Montcalm hosting Kent City, so they're going to play for the second time this year. Hornets took care of business the first time, look to do so again. So that's going to be really fun. And obviously, we're going to be looking as well for Reed City on the other side. Negaunee and Calumet are basically in if both of them win this week. Well, even Negaunee is not favored against Iron Mountain. They would still be in as the 1 seed with the gap they have. Standish Sterling is the 2 seed going to Boyne City. So now they're getting pulled up. That's the other hypothetical scenario. So we got a lot of hypotheticals. We try to keep it simple for you guys, but forewarning, you want all of the great numbers. We're going to bring that to you after the post-selection show, and that'll be next week here. And we can't wait to bring that to you. I think we're going to get super nerdy next week, and I can't wait.
Yeah, no, it should be fun. A lot of spreadsheets and probabilities. And
how many spreadsheets have we went through in the last 3 weeks?
That one thing I have is probably up to 20-some.
Oh, boy.
Because it's team dependent, and then the playoff point one, though, is always interesting to look at, right? Because if Ludington wins, if they lose, if Whitehall wins, then they lose, right? That's how I do it.
That's how we do it.
It's math.
Over 40 spreadsheets.
Shout out Math Man Fox.
There you go, right there. Big thanks to you guys for tuning in. Big thanks to Michigan ADAS. And we can't wait for Friday night. You can catch myself, Mark Holcomb, on Y102 for this game at this field. Beal City hosting Reed City. A battle of small towns is about to get fun. And then you can catch Coach Kostecki and Coach Scarpelli over there in Alma for the finale between the Panthers and the Big Rapids Cardinals. Should be a good week of football. I'm really actually sad, though. We can't see all of our great friends. I got a buddy over at 9 and 10. You guys probably heard of him, Jaden Jagtiani. Of course, he covered a lot of our games. And he's like, man, this is a great week for football because we're talking about all these matchups. Of course, they're going to Traverse City for the game of the week, right? The Patriot game. They're not going to be able to see all these games in of itself because the coverage college up there, and it's like we got all these games. You got McBain and Fowler. Obviously, you got some of these games.
How
with
is
Beal
that
City,
not
Reed
the
City.
game of the week,
It's
man?
crazy, man. Like we
That's-
got so many good games this week. So stay tuned, subscribe, and we'll break it all down for you next week right here on the Rundown, presented by Michigan 8S.